Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fDi Masterclass. I'm Jacopo Dettoni, the editor of fDi Intelligence, the foreign investment monitor of the Financial Times in London. And more importantly, I have the pleasure today to be co-hosting this masterclass where we will discuss digital strategies to unlock investment beyond COVID-19. We have a fantastic program and lineup of speakers today, but before diving right into it, let me thank the IEDC for organizing the Economic Development Week and featuring this fDi Masterclass on its main program. The Economic Development Week is really a unique initiative in the world of economic development and a great source of information and why not inspiration for many professionals working in this field. But it's now time for me to introduce my co-host, Alyssa Sklar, the Vice President of Marketing of GIS Planning, also a company from the fDi Intelligence and Financial Times family, for her introductory remarks. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you so much, Jacopo. Really delighted to be here, and thanks to all of our presenters who are here with us today. We do indeed have a wonderful program to share. I want to thank everyone also for taking time out of their busy days to join us for this program. We're thrilled to be co-presenting with fDi Magazine as part of the fDi Intelligence Group. At GIS Planning, we have produced for the last 23 years the industry's leading online data tools for economic development, corporate site selection, place marketing. And it's really thrilling for us to have a lineup of people here to address the issues of investment attraction, particularly as we move into economic recovery, and how digital strategies can place a role. So we have, and we'll get, of course, proper introductions to them shortly, but we'll be looking at this from the angle of both site selection, from economic developers' perspective as well, and also from the perspective of nurturing innovation, entrepreneurship, startups, and supporting our local businesses, which we all know has been very much top of mind for many of us these past 16 months. And so with that, I'll turn this back over to you, Jacopo, and you can help get us started.
All right, well, Alyssa, thank you. And before introducing our first speaker, let me also encourage our audience to ask questions using the chat box sitting on the right-hand side of this webinar video. We will have three speakers. Each one of them will have one presentation. Then there will be some time probably at the end of each presentation to field a couple of questions, and then also a Q&A sessions to wrap up the whole event at the very end. So without further ado, let's cut to the chase. As said, we've got an intense program. So let me now introduce our first speaker, Didi Caldwell. Maybe many of you in North America and elsewhere may be already familiar with her. Didi has been advising on site selection and incentive negotiations since 1998, first with the global firm Fluger, and then with her own consultancy, Global Location Strategies. I had a glimpse at her presentation on digital tools and strategies available to economic development organizations to really refine their strategies, and I can't wait to see it in its integrity. So let me join me in a digital but still very warm welcome to Didi Caldwell.
Thank you, Jacopo. It's very nice to be here. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Very happy to be here, and I tell you, it's kind of a crazy year, and I thought it would be good. Jacopo mentioned that I've been doing site selection for nearly a quarter of a century, which puts fear in my heart to think about how old that makes me. But needless to say, I've seen quite a few changes over the last 2.5 decades. So I thought it'd be kind of nice to look back at those. So, contact management, for example, 1988, old school. I don't know how many of you recognize the Rolodex, but that was the way that we kept track of our contacts. And obviously, new school now is you have things like Salesforce and Pipedrive and all kinds of contact management databases that make it much more efficient and easy to share. Remote communication back in the day, you were lucky if you had a pager and you could go to the cell phone or to the payphone. of course, now we have this amazing computer in our hand that we actually call a phone, but it's so much more than that. But just being able to communicate with your clients in the office and when you're out on site visits and things like that has been completely transformed. Location research. When I started doing this at Fluger View back in 1998, we had a library that consisted of all of the documentation, marketing materials that we received from states and communities. And it was filed under state and then community. So if you wanted to know who the economic developer was in Anniston, Alabama, you went to the library to find that out. The internet was just starting to become a wealth of information, but it still wasn't anything like it is today. And we still have a site selection library of sorts. It just happens to be online. So anything that we want to learn, whether it's about who to contact or find out information about sites and buildings or demographics or workforce, we have the world at our fingertips through our computer. Site visits. Site visits used to look like this. And I'm not saying that those types of site visits have gone away, but we're definitely seeing, we started doing virtual site visits back in 2013 as a way to speed up the process and to allow us to visit more sites earlier in the process and also get our clients involved earlier. But with the pandemic, more and more companies have started doing this, and this is becoming very commonplace. And I don't think it's going to go away. So as a site selection consultant, what we've seen is that when I first started in this, the barriers to entry were very, very high because everything was relationship based. And as websites and email and all kinds of communication and research tools became available, the barriers to entry really fell. But what we're seeing now is at the high cost of the tools of the trade. So we subscribe to labor databases, GIS platforms. We've invested in our own technology. And so these are the things that really differentiate site selectors, true location strategy consultants from kind of one of these. And this is an example of what our technology stack looks like. So you can imagine the money that goes into developing these technologies, to subscribing to them, to leveraging them in our process. And so from a site selector's perspective, we have also had to up our digital game. And this is just an example of that. So things were changing really rapidly, and then all of a sudden we had this global shutdown, and it's very difficult for me to even comprehend how that type of an impact, what the impact would have been if this had happened 10, 15, or 20 years ago. Even 5 years ago, it would have been a lot different. But what COVID-19 did was, for the digital world, is just accelerate everything. I mean, it just started moving at warp speed, which we've heard a lot about, Operation Warp Speed, but also the transformation to more of a virtual digital platform and a way of doing business has just accelerated. This is a survey from Thomas for Industry. They've been doing this over the pandemic, and essentially what it's saying here is this is a manufacturing companies, but I think it applies for economic developers or just about any business, is that there's going to be less reliance on in-person meetings, less reliance on going to conferences, and more utilizing the virtual tools of website, emails, virtual events in order to market your location, your product, your service. So at Global Location Strategies, what we've been really looking at is where in the site selection process do we have the ability to automate? And there are certain things that can easily be done by machines and things that are more based on experience and require human interaction. I think we might get there with AI eventually, but at least in the location strategy and the site selection world, we're not quite there with automated intelligence. So when I look at this location benchmarking, so having a consultant involved to help you determine what's really important in a location is still required, but companies more and more can use tools, and site selection consultants can use tools to automate location benchmarking. So evaluating states, communities, countries against one another to determine what's going to be the best location. Then on the site identification and screening, that can also be automated. And that's like your initial first pass. And I'll show you some examples of that. Then you get into more of the things where it really does take hands-on, where you need an expert to be able to conduct these virtual and field site visits, to do the due diligence, to do the incentive negotiations. But on the back end, there are also tools that can help you automate the administration and compliance of those incentive packages that you are awarded. So at GLS, I'm just going to breeze through a few of the innovations that we made. So on our geospatial platform, which we've been using GIS for several decades, but we really have invested in developing an inventory of sites that we've looked at previously. So we've got 10 plus years of all the sites that we have considered for projects, as well as sites that have been inputted proactively. So if we run across a site that we haven't considered for a project, and we think that it's going to be a good match in the future, then we go ahead and put it in our database. We also subscribe to JobsEQ, which is a wealth of information on the labor analytics. And we've invested in 2 software platforms, which are going to be rolling out shortly. The first is Lasso, that we developed in conjunction with Evergy. And this is a request for information or a request for proposals automation tool that allows for collaboration. It allows for delegation. So be on the lookout for that. And then we developed Site Shepherd internally that allows us and our clients or companies that want to do it themselves to subscribe to this platform so that they can analyze sites and locations to determine which ones have the best cost and quality combination. So that's what we've done as site selection consultants. So what do we need of economic developers? Well, we really need you to meet us in the middle. And that's a combination of both proactive and reactive type activities. So proactive is developing your sites, doing conceptual layouts and having a great website. And then the reactive is when you actually get a request for proposal from us, how do you market that proposal to us? And even though we're talking about digital marketing, I think you still need to think about the fundamentals. So if any of you took marketing classes in college, you know that there's the 4 Ps of marketing: product, promotion, pricing, and place. I like to call it the 5 Ps of economic development marketing, and the extra P there is people. Because people, you can argue that that's part of your product, but it's become such an important part of the site selection process that I think it merits being called out separately. So when I go through these, I want you to think about it in the context of these 5 Ps, because they're all going to remain important. So first of all, your website is your face to the world. And this is no longer about, the websites of the 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, this is where you really have to tell your story. One of the states that I think does an excellent job of this is Virginia. And one of the things that I really like about this is that they go beyond just the standard data. And they talk about why Virginia, and they actually have leaders, CEOs of companies that are talking about why Virginia is a good fit for them. And this really helps bring it down to a level of that companies and site selection consultants can understand. GIS planning also has the ability to build Zoom tours for you so that you can promote your location. Here's just a couple of examples. I put this in here because I think you can't forget about quality of life type aspects, because while you need good sites and buildings, it's really people that are making the decisions. And this picture here of Grapevine, Texas, I just want to go there, And so it's really important to have that sort of emotional connection as well. There's also GIS stories that Esri does, which I think are really effective. This one happens to be from the Savannah Joint Regional Development Authority. And it's another way that you can kind of familiarize in an interactive way people that are looking at your location with what you have to offer. The other thing is, I think it's really important to have a comprehensive site and asset database where you go beyond the standard data. So this is another example of GIS planning where it's it's accurate, it's comprehensive. And what I really like is being able to go beyond just the sites and buildings. So being able to look at what business and industry is in the proximity of the site. This might be really important for certain companies if they're looking for suppliers or customers. And then this one on the South Carolina Power team, I love this because they have water and wastewater capacities. What I find as a site selection consultant is that sometimes it's very difficult for me to use site databases because they don't have the basic information I need. I'm not just looking for 100 acres next to an interstate. I need to know what capacity it has for water and wastewater. What size electrical service can it provide? Not just is there rail there, but what type of service is available. So going beyond the data. Then one of the things I think I've started to see more and more, and I love this, is the dynamic interactive RFP responses. And so I know Zoom Prospector has the ability to build a website for communities to respond to requests for proposals. So no more going to my Dropbox or here's my FTP site. It's actually a website that you can customize. So you have a letter from the governor in this example, you can put videos there, very interactive. And it's also designed such that if we have more questions and we need more supporting information, the community can just load it directly into the website so that we can access it directly. The other thing when you're responding to RFPs is leave nothing to the imagination. The more visualizations and conceptual layouts you can provide, the better off you're going to be, because it's humans, and if you just see a picture of a site, it's very difficult to understand the scale, how their facility might look there, how it interacts with the other, with the infrastructure and other tenants in the park. This is one that I love that is kind of an augmented reality. So this is an urban environment, but this could be used also in industrial parks to understand scale. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about marketing to startups, because I think that this is something that sometimes in the economic development world, we're so focused on, recruiting that big home run. And it really does make sense to think about these startup firms and how you can facilitate their entry into your location. And whether they're fledgling, early stage, or they're scaling up, they all need access to infrastructure, talent, and access to funding. And what that looks like is going to change tremendously depending on what stage they are at. So from going from someone that has an idea to early stage where the idea becomes a proven concept, and then scaling up where you really make that a reality. What you need to do goes from providing a safety net for those people that are willing to risk everything and start their own business, to providing them funding opportunities, and then providing them an opportunity through sites and buildings and infrastructure and financing around the incentives. That's more of like the traditional economic development, but there are needs all the way across the spectrum. So I'll just close with saying that, again, remember that digital marketing is just like regular marketing. You still have to think about those 5 Ps, but it's a multifaceted way for you to reach out. And I think that one of the things that I was talking about with one of my colleagues is that digital marketing is important, but particularly in times of isolation with the quarantine, it's also really great to have that personal touch as well. So snail mail, don't forget about that, or making an actual phone call to someone. So there's an appropriate time and place for both the digital and the traditional type of marketing. Thank you very much.
All right, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Didi. Very insightful presentation. So I also like particularly that final emphasis also on startups, and we will hear more about that from Rodrigo Mas of 500 Startups in the third and final presentation. Let me ask you one question, Didi. How do you, you mentioned already, obviously, the big changes that we experienced in the past 12 months and how this really accelerated many ensuing changes. How do you allocate budget between digital tools and physical tools? And also you mentioned a corollary to this question. A second question would be, you mentioned there was a statistics that you showed at the very beginning about also trade events. What is your take on trade events? How to what extent do you expect people to go back to the kind of like pre-COVID business as usual, going to events for networking? Do you expect that to resume at any point, or it will be much more reduced than we were used to?
Well, I think it's going to take some time. So Select USA is coming up in June, and it's going to be totally virtual. And so we're a big sponsor there. Site Selection Tech So if you come and you want to stop by our booth, I don't know exactly what that means, stop by our booth, but apparently you can stop by the virtual booth. But I've heard that there are a lot more companies that are attending than normal because number one, they don't have to take the time and expense to get on a plane and actually attend. And secondly, because it's been difficult for foreigners to travel to the US over the last year. I mean, there's still travel restrictions. And so this is one of the ways that they can actually jumpstart their site selection process or, evaluating whether the United States is the right place for them to be. I think it's going to take some time. I mean, we're all at different places around the world in terms of vaccinations and what's going on with the pandemic. So I think it's going to take some time, but I also think that people are really craving for that personal interaction. So I'm optimistic that we're going to have, I think that for me personally, I'm going to travel less. I've found that I can do a lot of things virtually that I felt like I had to do face-to-face previously. But I also recognize the value of sitting across the table from someone and looking them in the eye and breaking bread with someone and having those sort of dynamic, spontaneous type interactions that just aren't possible in the Zoom world. I do think over time, though, that technology is going to continue to improve so that it will be more of like a real life experience. So it's a time of great evolution.
Okay, I got one final question on my end, and then I'll pass it over to Alyssa. What's your assessment? Obviously, your counterparts often are economic development organizations. What do you see in the market? To what extent do you see EDOs catching up with their digital marketing, digital tools, etc.?
I think it's all over the map. I see economic development organizations that are doing a fantastic job. And I see economic development organizations, I go to their website and it looks like it's circa, 2002. And it really is I'm a site selection consultant. I won't say that I don't care what your website looks like, but I look beyond that. The most important thing for me on a website is who do I call? If I have a project, I want to send you a request for proposal. Who do I call? And I don't want, a form to fill out. But I'm not the only one that's looking at your website. Where you're really trying to talk to is potential employers and potential employees. So it's really become just as important to recruit talent and employees to your location as it is employers. And if you have an interface that looks like it's from the 90s, that's the type of interest that you're going to get. So I don't know that you can spend too much money, but you can't spend too much effort. And the good thing about these digital strategies, that we spend tens of thousands of dollars on printing brochures and mailing them out and all of that. So, I think a lot of times marketing budgets have gone down and that's okay, but you still need to invest in branding and building up your image. I mean, what can you say to the world about why they should choose your location, whether it's a company that's looking to invest or it's a software engineer or a welder or whatever that wants to establish themselves in a new location?
Okay, that's fantastic. So I think that that's it for now. Stay with us. There will be more questions for you two at the very end. But let me now bring back Alyssa with our next speaker. Thank you very much, Didi.
Thank you, Jacopo, and thank you so much, Didi. We do indeed have some more questions for you, but we will take questions also at the end. So I'm sure we'll come back to some of the things that you've been talking about. It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Amy Madison, Executive Director of the Pflugerville Community Development Corporation in Texas. She served the organization since January 2014. She is a board member for IEDC, the Texas Economic Development Council, the Capital Area Economic Development District, and serves on the advisory board for Clean Texas. During the past 7 years, Amy has successfully recruited or assisted in expanding 54 projects, bringing over $7.1 million square feet of expansion and providing for 4,097 new full-time jobs in her region. These projects added an estimated $621 million to the local tax base for Pflugerville, one of the fastest growth cities in the US. Amy, we're delighted to have you here with us today, and we're really excited to hear you present a case study, talk about some of these recent projects.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. I am looking forward to having a conversation with everyone today, and really want to start out with, yay, it's National Economic Development Week. It's a time for all of us to have an opportunity to really tell the communities that we work with what we do and how we do it, and to really promote the efforts that we've had all year long. So it's really, really an exciting opportunity for me to be here today among this star-studded cast. Hearing what Dee just said, I'm thinking to myself, oh gosh, I need to go back and redesign everything. Not really. I think we're on that same track and we're midway to getting there. But I think some of the things I'm going to share is going to be more about how you go from old school to new school and doing it in a fairly rapid pace. So I want to start out first with what the heck is a Fluger? I mean, it does beg the question. And, you know, really, it is a German word that means plowman or woman. And, you know, we're still moving dirt to this day. We're just using different tools. And those tools, whether that's digitized or whether it's on the ground moving dirt, have been significantly changing in our community. And speaking of our community, while we're not Austin, we are close. We're only about 15 minutes downtown Austin. We're very strategically located between I-35 and SH-130, and to the north and south 45. Both of those toll roads, 45 and 130, were added back in 2007, 2008. Prior to that, our city really wasn't having much growth at all. And as a result of those two highways, we've seen significant change. The demographics we have, we're very proud of. It's a very diverse community. And then also the veteran population, I point out, because that 12% really adds to that 800,000 working adults that we have within the broader region. So here's what it looks like to be a boom town. And, you know, each of these decades that we go through here, there were significant changes. The PCDC, which I represent, Pflugerville Community Development Corporation, came along in 2001. And so it kind of shows you what's happened. This number on the end, 2050, our expansion to 250,000, I think it's going to happen sooner than that, given everything that's going on in our community right now and some of the announcements I'm going to talk about. So we're trying to keep up with all that growth and trying to maintain infrastructure, et cetera, is one of the things that the PCDC tries to assist the city with. So what is PCDC? Pflugerville Community Development Corporation. We're celebrating our 20th year, yay. And this is my rock star team. We have a 4-member team right now. We were incorporated again as a type 4B corporation in Texas, and not to get too much in the weeds, there's 2 types in Texas, 4A and 4B. 4B allows only differences in how we can provide public park and recreational facilities in addition to the traditional economic development, creating primary jobs, workforce education, business retention. But when we were developed, as I mentioned earlier, there were no industries, no retail, and we were the highest tax rate, number 2 highest tax rate in Texas in terms of a community. And, you know, when you went looking for a pair of socks, you needed to go to another town because they just didn't exist. We now use socks for advertising our community. Honestly, we do that. And we have experienced a 650% sales tax growth over that time. What do? We invest in projects. We develop and invest in marketing tools to promote the city of Pflugerville as a premier location. We build relationships, and relationships are key for us and really came in handy during COVID, especially with our primary employers and business influencers like Dee. We work closely with local partners, including our nonprofits, our city, our county, chamber, et cetera, in order to make change in our community. And we had those established relationships, but as most of you probably experienced across the United States, all those relationships increased and were improved, and you came together stronger as a result of what was happening. So the digital adaptions we did for COVID-19 were varied. First of all, we started this 7 a.m. meeting. I just woke up after being quarantined at home and said, we can't just be remote. We've got to do something now. And we started Zooming and making phone calls first, and then Zooming on a regular, reoccurring basis in what we called our supply chain roundtable. And those meetings were very early in the morning. Not everybody was on camera, I'll say. And we would talk about the issues they were having with PPE development and or other supply chain issues. A lot of our additive manufacturers went to work here, and actually were some of the ones that came out of the chute first with masks and shields and other types of equipment that was needed, because we had nothing at the local community level. And so that was really, really an exciting process that we were involved in. It was all done via webinars and virtually and phone calls. But we couldn't get it advertised in the newspaper. We couldn't get the newspaper to tell the story about everything because they were so busy, and they were also laying people off and in trouble. So we then decided we'd do webinars, and it was the first time we'd attempted. And I would say don't ever do 3 webinars in 1 month, but we did a webinar every week to highlight all the businesses that had really stepped up in the community and produced the PPE, but also assisted us in trying to help with supply chain. And then in the middle of the pandemic, we also tried to begin a training program, which when you take a look at that, there wasn't anything open. No single education facility was open. And so it made it very difficult. We had a grant that we could use. We were matching that grant. We wanted to move forward with the program. So what did we do? We decided we would do rental. And so we called all the businesses that were essential that we were working with, the additive manufacturers, and said, can we utilize your facility? We'll pay you for your equipment, or not equipment, but for rental of the equipment, and come up to a standard rental fee, and with the exchange of them allowing us to bring folks in the community that wanted to train in this really fascinating field on some of the state-of-the-art equipment in the world. We have 2 original equipment manufacturers in our backyard, and we wanted to continue to grow that workforce that they would need in the near future. So this is how the Pflugerville Manufacturing Academy actually happened. When you start looking for where's the building, there isn't one. And so I know that's not necessarily digitizing, but it's actually using good resource in the community and being able to still move forward on workforce training and a truly remarkable program. We're still in the midst of this, and we've since added teacher externships to this program, which has really been, awesome, because the teachers are going back to train the students about the many, many options that are there for not just additive manufacturing, but manufacturing per se. And there's a lot of students that are completing school now that are not going on to college. So trying to tap that workforce was really the true target for this. And then there's the story. So for me, my story goes back about 8 years ago when, when I first started working with in Schertz, Texas, on development of an industrial park. And leaving that community after 7 years of development and getting everything shovel ready, I took a position in San Marcos and immediately found myself competing for a project against the dirt that I'd just helped finish develop. We lost that bid, and it was for an Amazon distribution center. It was the first one that would be located in the Austin, San Antonio region. And I was disappointed, sorely disappointed, but they said, we'll be back. Well, they did come back after I moved to Pflugerville 7 years later, and I was in a position of economic development there. And I got a phone call from them, and they said, hey, we're going to announce next week. We just want to call and say, thanks for all the work you did on this project. And my response was, wrong town. And of course, we continued to work to recruit an Amazon center to our community. So we finally did get there a few years later, working through all the networking that we had, working through all the folks that we had worked with in the past. We after looking at 3 different projects, locations, and having gone through 3 different towns, We obviously dubbed this Project Charm. There's a lot of threes involved in a lot of things that we did with him, and it was kind of a joke amongst us. But in the location of the land site, we were able to find something that worked, but it was not annexed. It didn't have any entitlement. We didn't have sewer to it yet. It was quite an ordeal, and we were on a fast track. So all this happened in just before the pandemic, August 2019, when we finally found the suitable site. We had taken 18 months to get there, but we finally did. And we had submitted on the 19th of September and finally broke ground February 14. And we were giving a sigh of relief because the project had been extremely stressful and tense trying to find something that would work. And then, of course, COVID. And we went into lockdown, and lockdown in Pflugerville began March 16th. Soon after that, the county started issuing orders between March and May that could have shut this project down completely. Because of our relationships we had with the local manufacturing association, along with the Austin Chamber of Commerce, we were able to really provide really good information to the politicians who were trying to make good decisions at that time. And we were able to narrowly escape any kind of shutdown. This really did jeopardize the project. And if we hadn't had the collective bargaining power of our partnerships, it could have actually not happened. But it did. And actually, everything was moving along fairly smoothly again until the next hiccup. And that occurred in early May. We were looking at, with being a total sales tax generated revenue stream, downturns, not knowing what was going to happen. Early returns were really not in yet on what we were going to see in downturn, upturn, whatever. And we were very, very concerned. And our incentive that we had worked with Amazon was for on-site infrastructure improvements. And about that time, the city came to us and said, we've got an intersection about a mile from here that's failing. Amazon wasn't required to do any improvements in that intersection. And over the phone and via some webinar or Zoom meetings, we were able to visit with the company, explain our predicament. The outpour for that particular intersection was nearly $4 million, not counting what we would have to do in the incentive. And so what we were able to do was to negotiate a redirection of the incentive dollars to the intersection, which would improve not just passage for their 1,000+ employees that they would hire, but also for the entire region, which helped us not only in retaining jobs, but expanding in the future. It was quite a remarkable undertaking, and it truly was a partnership throughout the entire time. 3.8 million square feet are looming in outside my window now, and we're looking forward to the hiring. So the next step was to apply for an EDA grant. We were able to effectively do that for the city. And so the cost of that project went from over $7 million between trying to incentivize and doing that intersection to funding approximately $2.3 million out of the PCDC budget. So quite an undertaking, especially during a pandemic. And it involved a lot of partnerships, but it also involved relationships that were built prior to COVID. So we ended the year with a really great year. It was the best year ever. Our numbers are amazing for that year. We had a lot of folks that joined us in the community. Some were related to COVID and some not. And as a result, we did receive some awards from some magazines, as well as our state association in economic development. But perhaps one of the highest recognitions that we received all year was the Gold Award from International Economic Development Council for our population group for the Organization of the Year. That's a 360 look at economic development, and we were proud of that and proud today. So future digital strategies, we have been trying to mix it up, Dee Dee. We are working with our providers, including and leveraging Zoom Prospector, working with GIS planning. to develop more multimedia approaches to how we present projects, and actually are working on that proposal update as well. We are doing virtual tours. We have instituted those, so we've got some drone footage that we've used even in last year. We're leveraging those vendor tools as well to deliver some success stories, grant programs that we have in various ways for the community as well. So it's just a mix of media that we're trying to actually promote and do. And then finally, just recently, we started the Fluger View, and I'm hosting that to provide interviews with companies instead of doing testimonials like we used to do, just getting a statement, etc. We're trying to interview companies to talk to them about why their location is good and what's been good for them and where they're looking for and forward to workforce, how that's being addressed in our community, as well as residents and community leaders. And we're doing that locally. We're producing it locally with our own staff. And these are anywhere from 1 minute to 3 minute vignettes. So, future of digital strategies. Well, first of all, we've learned a lot over the past year, and a lot of it took us into the future, but some of us took it, some of it took us more primitive. So when Texas experienced the big freeze, we had to learn a lot of things, but we did end up with a motto for a lifetime, and that is that Flugers dig in and can do anything as long as they've got Wi-Fi and electricity. Back to you, Alyssa.
Thank you so much, Amy. Wow, that is a lot to digest. Clearly, you guys were incredibly proactive over the course of this past year. And it also is clear that you went in fairly well positioned to move forward. You had some digital savvy, you had some strategies already in place. Obviously, things came out of left field, both the pandemic, of course, the big freeze, and some of those other things. We do have a few questions, some of which I'm going to put off to the end, but it seems like a lot of the strategies that you put into place over this past year relate to communication. So you've got data, you've got information, and a lot of it is a matter of how you communicate that to your various stakeholders. So that might be that really innovative manufacturing academy that you've got, it might be the webinars, it might be the Fluger View and those kinds of things. What are some of the top lessons you've learned when it comes to taking data and using digital strategies to communicate it to people?
That's a great question. You know, one of the things that we struggle with is trying to get there quickly. People like Didi don't have a lot of time. They're trying to get information as quickly as they can and trying to position that in a way that's formatted for success, where they get it quickly. A good example of how we did that just recent was actually modifying our annual report. I know this is not about, you know, informing maybe a site selector, but a way that really shows how we did it. We took what was about an 8-page printed report and turned it into about 1.5 minute video that we were able to push out on social media, sent to all the elected officials. And with that, in a nutshell, they were able to get really, really good information very, very fast, very quickly. And of course, we had a way for them to connect us if they had questions. So I think it's just looking at more ways that you can get information in a tight package. And we continue to do that with our real estate and site selectors as well.
Thank you. Actually, that's a great example because it comes down to taking really complex, dense information that not everyone's going to read all the pages in a report or look through all the entries on a spreadsheet, and then taking, you know, out of that the most important nuggets and presenting it in a compelling way that, you know, at least then we can get people to see that. Hopefully then they'll delve back into the rest of it. I just want to reminder, because we've had a few questions, we are recording this session and it will be available on demand for the following 30 days, where we'll have some follow-up information for you, but you'll be able to access it using the same link that you used to register. So that is something that we will be letting you know about. And also just a reminder that you can ask questions, you can type them in. We do have a moderator who is looking at those and will be passing them on to us. Amy, I did have one question that I thought was actually a really excellent. There's a few fantastic questions, but where do you get the information regarding your infrastructure capacity? I know when I introduced you, we talked about that. It's an interesting point.
Well, the city actually is in charge of all of the infrastructure throughout the community, and we work with them on a day-to-day basis, actually, and looking at where are the targeted areas. Recently did a bond issuance in order to do some improvements in the area. But when we look at any kind of site selection, trying to look at where are the best options, we try to mitigate the impacts on the city by working with them to determine the best location. And also in advance, being very upfront with whomever we're working with on how long that infrastructure is going to take to get to a certain site location and the costs, estimated costs. So we've tried to estimate those based on our top sites, and we're pretty on the ready for that. But with this particular project with Amazon, we really did have to do some extra heavy hitting, and the city came to the table. The very first conversation we have with any recruitment project when we're looking at a new build is with the city. We bring them in immediately and we work with them throughout. I hope that answers your question.
It does, yes. Thank you very much. That's great. I really appreciate that. Amy, thank you so much. I'm going to turn this back over to Jacopo, who's going to introduce our final speaker for today, Rodrigo. And then we're going to take some additional questions at the end where we pull everything together. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much, Amy, and also fantastic presentation, fantastic perspective of an EDOs that is really trying to develop its own community, also through this attracting these big projects, and also congratulations on those fantastic T-shirts, PCDC, which I really appreciated personally. But on to our next stop of our journey. It was really a journey. We started with Didi, that is located in South Carolina. We had Amy from Texas, in Texas. And now our next speaker is located in Los Angeles. And I'm delighted to introduce Rodrigo Mas, who is the Executive Director and Head of Global Innovation of 500 Startups, which is one of the world's biggest and most active early stage venture capital fund and seed accelerator. And I'm particularly happy to have him here because I really believe that the role of startup ecosystems in the development of communities really around the globe has grown so rapidly in the past decades. And firms like 500 Startups have really been providing EDOs with a lot of guidance with regards to developing startup ecosystem, have really strengthened this relationship between economic development and tech entrepreneurship. Rodrigo, with his team, has spearheaded these efforts at 500 Startups. He has a presentation for us. So again, join me in a warm digital welcome for Rodrigo Mas.
Thank you so much, Jacopo. It's an honor to be here. Perfect. All right, well, thank you again. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to build thriving ecosystems and how to create more resilient and sustainable economies through entrepreneurship. I will share a high-level overview of what we heard through a recent research study that we conducted here at 500, where our team interviewed economic development leaders and government officials from over 40 cities and states across the United States, Latin America, and regions in the Middle East. The goal was to really try to understand the current state of ecosystems, especially given the context of the pandemic and its adverse effects. We went in depth in exploring what are some of the key challenges and opportunities, and how can cities, states, and countries build more resilient and sustainable ecosystems. But before we jump into the insights, I would love to just provide a brief overview and context on 500 and who we are. Our core belief at 500 is that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. We don't believe that talent and the best ideas can only be found in Silicon Valley, London, and New York. We believe that with the right elements and conditions, we can create opportunities for talent to grow and prosper from virtually anywhere in the world. Our mission at 500 is to uplift people and economies through entrepreneurship. We have been extremely fortunate to see our mission's importance come to life now more than ever during these times of change. Through supporting economic development, corporate innovation initiatives, we have been a key player in advancing organizations, cities, states, and nations around the world as they aim to maintain economic relevance, diversify their economic base, and create new sustainable opportunities for growth and prosperity. We're also honored to rank as the #1 most active early stage investor in the world. We have over 2,500 portfolio companies, including 21 unicorns, valued over $1 billion, and investments in over 77 countries with over $500 million in committed capital. So this investment experience gives us a unique opportunity and foresight into development and the economy around the world. All right, so let's get to the challenges. Here are the top 3 challenges that we captured and summarized from our research study. The third top challenge that we heard is around creating a cohesive plan to attract and guide stakeholders. This top challenge is extremely relevant across almost every region that we interviewed. Countries, states, and cities are investing energy to differentiate themselves and are continually focused on attracting key stakeholders to their region. For example, in the United States, Silicon Valley and New York have been the dominant coastal hubs for North America, but many regions around the world and within the US are reinventing themselves and taking advantage of the recent untethering of talent from these traditional urban epicenters. However, most regions are still struggling to articulate and align their distinct value proposition and design a cohesive strategy to attract and direct key stakeholders towards a structured and common goal. The second top challenge that we heard was around access to capital resources for entrepreneurs. This challenge is the second most prevalent across all regions that we interviewed and truly the most heartfelt across economic development leaders. Regions express that access to capital is always one of the biggest issues for entrepreneurs. Even regions considered to have more mature and advanced ecosystems are still not where they need to be in terms of access to capital. And then the #1 most expressed challenge across all regions is to build and grow strong early stage startup programs. Economic development leaders shared that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the number of people who would like to embrace entrepreneurship and start their own business. But for regions where startup ecosystems are still at a very early stage, this can be extremely challenging. Most startups are either too early to know how to wisely negotiate and receive investments, while others need more structured support and training to become high potential and high growth. Regions are seeing this as a critical opportunity to diversify their economic base, create new jobs, and provide future opportunities for exponential growth. So what does all of this mean? The global pandemic, the economic crisis, the societal uprise against social economic disparities have ushered in a new radical era of change for all of us. The unprecedented speed of impact of all these events have forced not only the accelerated disruption of our daily lives, but have also completely upended our economies and exacerbated existing critical gaps and challenges within our global communities. Given our new reality, now, more than ever, we must rely on economic development efforts to guarantee the survival and sustained growth of our cities, states, and countries. This is a framework that our investment team at 500 uses to assess the current landscape for opportunity. We must look beyond and not only build for the crisis, but build also for the future, especially in areas of permanent acceleration. These will be the industries of the future, which will provide opportunities for sustainable growth and resilience. And we have preliminarily identified some of these industries, which are around healthcare, biopharma, productivity tools, digital media, education, logistics, and fintech. And what we're seeing is cities and states and countries looking to reinvent their economies, looking to reinvent their branding and their positioning, given this new opportunity, both with talent and the reshuffling of their core economic pillars. So what does success look like and what can be done? Through our research and experience, we have identified 6 core elements that are needed in order to have a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. We call this our Ecosix Framework. Our goal is to design a strategy that aims to assess the current state and set a clear and accelerated path towards the future, activating, aligning, creating, and managing all of the required core elements to build a resilient and prosperous environment. These core elements that we have identified are startup performance, looking at the robust pipeline of technology-powered startups, all the different stages, looking at the talent pool, looking at investments, looking at platform, understanding the market reach, and government. And I will be able to go in further detail in these as well. But in order to have a thriving ecosystem, all of these elements must either be created or activated. The intensity or presence of each element will vary depending on the ecosystem. Creating a clear vision and having a master plan for development is critical to attract and align key stakeholders, such as investors, corporates, and entrepreneurs, to operate under a shared blueprint that directs funding, resources, and energy towards a common and shared goal. Part of the findings and the insights that came from our research was that a lot of the economic development groups were operating in a very fragmented or siloed way. So coming together with a common mission and looking at collaboration and partnership becomes critical. I will double click briefly on each of these elements so you can see the mechanisms and the measures behind all of them. So the first one's around startup performance. It's really around building a robust pipeline of technology-powered startups across all stages, looking at growth and exit. And we use this also as a measure, looking at technology-powered, fast growth firms, looking at is there a robust enough pipeline, looking at the growth and exit measures, looking at M&As, IPOs, and so forth. From the talent pool, here we're really looking at the skilled and experienced in the talent pipeline. We're looking at the PhD ratio within the region. We're looking at the technical development. We're looking at culture. We're looking at the dynamic job generation and all of those metrics. These are all really critical to part of the equation. The third component is around investment, right? Is there sufficient funding and financing, right? Looking at venture capital funding, looking at angel, corporates, foundations, and government, and other forms of financing as well. Platform is also critical. Understanding what is the platform that is housing this initiative? Does it provide the support through professional services? Is there enough mentorship and connectivity? Is there enough incubation and acceleration present? And again, you're starting to notice that all of these elements, if they're standalone and developed in silos, they will not create overall sustainability. They all need to be working together. Market reach has also become a critical component. Understanding, is there access to large venture-friendly markets, either domestically or through regional and global connectivity? Understanding partnerships, understanding, are we positioning the city or the region as a gateway, as a landing pad, as a launching pad? All these elements become critical. And then finally, one of the most important, which is government. Understanding policy, regulation, tax incentives, exemptions, also connections. Government plays a critical role in building the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and bringing all of these elements together and orchestrating them becomes extremely critical. So this is the main high-level overview, and I do want to open up for questions because I figure we have more discussion on this, but very high level of our strategy, and Jacopo, just open to any questions. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much, Rodrigo. Super informative and also very, very, very compelling presentation. I have a question for you, and then we can take other questions from the audience. Last year, I got a data for me that is really staggering. The US in 2019 mobilized something around $136 billion in venture capital funding. But what is really staggering is 90% of it went to 3 cities, New York, San Francisco, and Boston. So my question for you would be, what kind of role EDOs in other cities, other than these 3 big centers of obviously tech startups, what kind of role EDOs can play in capturing, intercepting a larger share of this incredibly big pie of venture capital investment available in the US?
Absolutely, it's a great question. I think a lot of it is around creating this vision and creating the master plan and having creating the narrative and the story for the region. And we heard a lot of this, with the other speakers around telling the story, telling the why and the purpose of why you should invest in the region, why you should land in that area, but also creating the future vision of where do we want to go, where do we want to be. And looking through and having a strategy becomes really critical then to attract investors outside of those traditional hubs. Because right now, areas outside of those traditional hubs are now poised for growth, given that talent now can work and live anywhere. And we do see that continuing for the foreseeable future. And people have now awakened to this new reality on how the acceleration of digital technologies have now enabled this remote workforce. But if EDOs are able, and economic development organizations are able to align on a vision, align on a strategy, and understand where do each of the stakeholders fall within the ecosystem, it will become a more attractive value proposition. Working on the value proposition, I think, is the first step to attract this investment.
Okay, I think that we have a question from the audience, right, on the collaboration between EDOs and startups and their tech ecosystem. What type of activities can EDOs develop to advise startups?
Absolutely. I think EDOs are strategically positioned within the ecosystem to understand what are the economic drivers within the region, what are the overall needs, and they can help to direct startups in terms of industries that are up and coming for the region, other potential collaborations with corporates and other areas of commerce within the region that becomes critical. EDOs are amazing connectors that could connect both startups to corporates, startups to government, both from an industry perspective, from a knowledge perspective. I think there's a wealth of knowledge and an incredible role that they can play within the startup ecosystem.
Okay, Rodrigo, fantastic. Let me now bring back, I got another question for you, but I think that this question is also a very good question for Amy and Didi. So let me also bring them back to the live panel as well as Lisa. And the question is really about the talent pool. And there is this gentleman from the audience that is asking that, well, saying that the talent pool seems to be the most difficult element in startups and businesses in general. So I guess obviously talent pool, the development of a talent pool probably falls a bit outside the scope, the remit of EDOs. Still, they could play, I would say, some advisory role in terms of like fine-tuning educational programs, educational curricula for the needs of the local industry. So from your own perspective, what do you think EDO can do to refine and adjust their own talent pools or the talent pool of their own communities to this long-term strategy that you believe is so important?
For me or Fluger?
Yes.
I can take.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can take
this
yes,
one, and
absolutely.
then we can go to Amy and Didi.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's two things that could be leveraged, at least. One is development of the existing talent and creating new opportunities, and the other one is attraction. All right, so how do we attract talent to the region? And again, it goes back to creating a compelling statement, a compelling value proposition to attract entrepreneurs. And you're going to attract talent if the right if the right environmental conditions are present, if they have funding, if they have resources, if they have platform, if they have education, if they have access to real estate and access to incentives. So all these things need to be working together in order to be able to effectively attract, develop, and most importantly, maintain. Retention is also critical because talent can hover around different cities after funding, but then they leave. So retention also becomes equally important.
Okay, I guess Amy, also you mentioned your initiative with a manufacturing academy. So also from your own perspective, what do you do to develop your own talent pool and make it a good fit for the needs of the investors you are after?
Good question. Well, first of all, when we started attracting additive manufacturing to our community, we knew that it was kind of over the head of a lot of folks that were actually in the ranks doing the education, not just locally, but also, in colleges and universities, because it was a new industry that was just beginning to break out and become very, very important to the entire manufacturing world, but also to R&D and working with entrepreneurs. This program that we did this year, it was designed so that we could get students and other people that were out of work and residents that are looking for careers interested in 3D training. It has some attraction positive for us, but with that, being able to take that then to the classroom and actually train the teachers to go in and train the students is extremely difficult work. Being able to do that with top of the line equipment is just fantastic. Right now, there's also stipends available for teachers that are taking externships, which actually enhance their participation in our program. What we think is most important in retaining and developing and maintaining talent is trying to get them aware of what they could be doing here, because we've got a lot of awesome companies under roof that they're not really teaching for or they don't know about. So that awareness is a first step in developing that pipeline. It expands from there. We have other expansion plans as well going on with this program. But I think really, truly, it's awareness to begin with. What can they do? What could they be doing? And to understand it's not dirty work. It's really high tech.
Okay, fantastic. I guess, Didi, if you got anything to add on this, maybe from your own perspective, what is when it comes to maybe relocating talent from the perspective of a company that is planning to move or open somewhere else and relocate some of its workforce, what are the elements that really move the needle and move the needle between one or another location?
Well, before I answer that, I want to go back to something that Rodrigo says about cultivating the talent that exists in your community now. Because I think the perception is that all entrepreneurs come out of MIT or Stanford and they're all in their 20s and they just come out ready to create something. And the reality is that a lot of entrepreneurs are people that maybe already have a business or they're working for someone else, and it's through their experience. And a lot of them are in their 40s and 50s. And I'm a good example of someone that through my own business, I decided that I had an idea about how I could develop something that could transform our industry. And so don't forget about what you already have in your community. And the great thing about where I live in Greenville is that there is a very strong network. So I have software developers. I have mentors here that are available to me. I have legal firms that have the expertise to advise a software company on how you protect your IP and how do you develop a user terms and for the licensing. And so making sure you recognize that and creating the right atmosphere for them to thrive. And then when they get ready, and also what Rigo said is that when they get ready to scale up, you want to make sure that you have the talent there to enable that. And so that's really more about talent attraction. And I preach this all the time because it's not just about, the size of the community or even your education. It's about creating a community that has a quality of life, an affordable quality of life where people actually want to migrate. I mean, one of the things we're seeing with the pandemic is that the talent can work. It's not work from home, it's work from anywhere. And so they are going to places where they can have a better work-life balance. So Greenville, for example, was just recognized in the Wall Street Journal as one of the boom towns because people are leaving some of the bigger cities and coming here and they sell their 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago and they move here and they buy a nice big house right downtown. So it's not just about the big cities. It's really about, these small and medium-sized towns can really compete. But you need to make that a place that is desirable and attractive to live.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we got quite almost 10 more minutes to fill other questions. I know that Alyssa has been going through the questions that we received. So Alyssa, share with us some of these questions, or share with our speakers some of these questions.
Thank you, Jacopo. Yeah, I was really struck as I was listening to the 3 presentations from very different perspectives, how so much of the strategies require us to take complex data and share it in ways that are accessible, engaging, compelling, and useful to the end user. So Rodrigo, you talked about the 6 core elements, and there's just so many different data points in there that need to be kind of crystallized, put into some kind of usable form, and then delivered to the various stakeholders, whether that is the elected officials and the folks in the economic development side, or to appeal to new entrepreneurs, potential workforce, to bring them in. Amy, from your perspective, clearly there's so much complex data at work in all of the things that you're doing, whether it's workforce training, workforce attraction, site selection. And then Didi, I know for you, being able to access this is clearly useful. What are the different formats? With the pandemic, there's so much that's changed. I wish we had a crystal ball and we could know exactly what things are going to look like in a year. But based on the things that we've experienced in the past, what do you think is the most likely to stay? Are those folks who've moved to Greenville, who are, work from anywhere, are they going to stick it out? Or are, we're starting to hear some grumbles from the big corporations saying that they actually are going to need people to, you're going to need to, leave the yoga pants at home and come back into the office. I guess I'm interested in hearing from all of you. And what do you think are some of the changes that are likely to remain? And how is this going to be reflected in the ways in which we communicate the important elements to our stakeholders? We'll leave it up. Go ahead, Didi.
So I think that, there's going to be there's obviously certain jobs that you just cannot do from home, right? You cannot do manufacturing jobs from home. And so those are going to continue to be strong. I do think that a decentralized workforce when it comes to offices, more office or back office or headquarter type operations, we're seeing a lot more decentralization so that people can live in smaller communities. But ultimately, I think communities need to have a little bit of everything. They need to have jobs that can work from anywhere, and recognizing that some of those people might be remote, and develop incentives for companies that are creating jobs that the company may not be based there, but the talent is. So how do you incentivize that? And then, but also have some of those more traditional jobs where people actually get up and have to drive and go to work every day. And it's that diversity that's going to help you weather the storm, whether it's a pandemic or it's supply chain shortages or it's an economic downturn that is more broad. Having that diversity is really going to help communities prosper.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, useful, but I think that you're absolutely right about that. Amy, I know you guys have been very proactive in your outreach, in the communication of these different data points for your different initiatives. What do you think are the most likely to weather the changes in the next couple of years? What are the new things you're going to be doing differently?
Well, first of all, I think we are evolving still. I think we have a blended approach that's going to continue into the long term. I think the challenge for economic development organizations now is how do we define incentives in some cases when people are remote and in other communities working, but you want that corporate headquarters in your community, trying to figure out how to deal with what you can do, what you can incent, and what really doesn't make sense is going to be a challenge. And I think too, just working with what you've got. I mentioned the 3D City. We earned that as a result of all the work we've done with additive manufacturing. But why? Why did we go there to begin with? And it was because we had a great portfolio. They address so many different industries. If there's a downturn, we've got other options. And with that portfolio comes R&D, which also leads into entrepreneurship. People come to them to develop that next widget or whatever. So I think trying to continue to diversify your community, which we've always done as economic development organizations, not relying on any one industry, but having a good mix of business in your community is going to be how you have the staying power to move into the future. And utilizing any and all mix of media and ways to tell that story is going to be critical. I think the ones that do the best are going to be the ones that use those tools and condense and make it more precise and precision pointed for the end user or whomever the audience is.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, no, that's awesome. We're nearing the end, but Rodrigo, I'd like to give you the final word here. What do you think is going to change for you guys?
Yeah, I just want to echo everything that Amy and Dee Dee said, especially around diversification, how it's critical. Let's not place all our bets on this, workforce that has now recently moved to different locations, but let's equally focus on developing the existing talent. Let's focus on both, right? And having that diversification, I think, is critical for the sustainment. I think we need to attract, but we also need to develop with equal strength. I just agree 100% with both observations.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for your presentations. We really appreciate it, very illuminating. We're excited to be able to continue to present this in an on-demand capacity. Jacopo, it's been a pleasure co-presenting with you.
Oh, wow. It's been such an interesting 75 minutes. First of all, let me also join you in thanking our speakers, Didi Caldwell, Amy Madison, Rodrigo Mas, also for their commitment to sticking to a pretty tight time slot. So thanks again. It doesn't happen very often to have speakers that are so committed to the rules of engagement. So thanks again, but most of all for your content. Thank you, Alisa. Fantastic co-hosting with you. I mean, for me, I think that it's been a rich discussion really to see these three different perspectives of the perspective from the site selection side, the perspective of an EDO, and the perspective of a company, a venture capital like 500 that develops with EDO startup ecosystems. So you really made it like a rich and diverse discussion, and I think that the emphasis obviously falls on not just on the availability of digital tools, but also, as you emphasized, on being able to translate this enormous amount of data that we have now within our reach into a coherent message and strategy. And I think that this goes way beyond probably economic development, right? I mean, we have been the past decade probably was a decade of big data, but now we are really in front of the question, what are we going to do with all this data? And this is exactly the fantastic, the line of reasoning that many organizations, including obviously EDOs, are trying to, the challenge they are trying to solve. And this is already generating incredible communication strategies and solutions. So thank you, everyone. Let me also, please, as a very final remark, let me also thank our production team. Even though it was a brief session, we really brought together many people to make it happen. So Claire Pratley, Sarah Fall, Megan Duff, and Jay Senondum for producing this event. Also, as a final note, I'm reading that there are many in the audience that are interested in your presentations. Probably also already testament to their informative value. So I guess we don't have the presentation, So I guess that the best and more straightforward way to deal with this is if you want to get in touch with our speakers on LinkedIn. I guess that each of them will be available to share their presentations and ask any other question. That's really it. To echo Amy, happy development week, everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you.